Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined by the Chairman of the Celtic Trust, David Lowe. Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind, David.
Oh, great to be here in this really exciting environment. I don't know if you're going to mention it to everybody, but it's 50 years since I've been here at Cathkin Park.
Well, you've been on the podcast 3 times, which for a guest is actually a record, David. The first time was in Stirling, then we did it over the phone at the height of the pandemic, and now you've visited us at Cathkin. Now, you said it was 50 years since you were last here. What are your memories of this magical place?
Well, they're very vague because I was obviously very young, but I was brought up on the south side, and my mother did not want my father to get me involved in all the Celtic Rangers, Catholic Protestant stuff that was going down at the time. It was all pretty unpleasant. So my father, who's from Elder Street, Govan, went to St Anthony's. He was a real big Celtic fan, and he basically did what his new wife said and took me under duress to Cathkin Park. And I can barely remember the game, but I do remember it was Thurlarnert versus Aberdeen. Don't remember too much of the surroundings other than it was a big, expansive park. But Olmsted, thankfully for me, shortly thereafterwards, Thurlarnert went bust. Shortly thereafterwards, Jock Stein came to Celtic. There was an upwards trajectory involved, and very quickly my sort of mother didn't object too much, and the rest is history. But it's ironic that I should be here 50 years later, I think, and it's got a lot of memories, and all the Jimmy Johnstone memorabilia I'm looking at is also very atmospheric and reminiscent of all the great times in the 60s that I had as a very young kid.
Oh, it definitely is, and I love spending time here, and particularly speaking about Celtic. We're going to speak today, David, mainly about the Celtic Trust, which you obviously now are the chairman of. Tell us a little bit about the Celtic Trust, where we are just now, and what the plans were before lockdown.
Well, I got involved with the Celtic Trust maybe about 6 years ago now, and it is a shareholder society first and foremost, so there is a sort of looming problem with Celtic shares. There's a very, very large shareholder base. It's an ageing shareholder base. The Fergus flotation was 26 years ago, and most of the shareholders that we have bought shares what's called off the page via an application form. It didn't involve opening accounts with stockbrokers. The Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, would describe probably your average Celtic shareholder as an unsophisticated investor. It's not a deprecating term, it's just the legalistic term that's used for a person that's not familiar with the protocols involved in investment. So the Celtic shareholder base there must be over 25,000 shareholdings spread across 3 categories. There's the original one that came out in 1994, whereby fans were offered a package of 2 shares, ordinary shares, and a thing called a preference share. It came as a package. And that constitutes the vast majority of Celtic shares in issue. Most fans that own it own the minimum amount. Again, that's quite usual. If there's an offer for sale, the majority of people that accept the offer tend to be at the smallest end. So Celtic has a whole lot of small shareholders owning 2 shares, 2 types of shares. It's the only one they've bought. So can be quite confusing if you're not familiar with the share market. Then you factor in over 26 years, people will have moved, flitted, relocated, whatever word you want to use, and people will have died. There'll be others that have inherited shares from family members, mothers and fathers. So if you're not familiar with the protocols of the investment world, you won't really know how to re-register those shares in your own name. or re-register them in your new address. It's not the most important thing you'll be thinking about at the time, so it tends to get neglected. So over the years, this has a cumulative effect. So what is that cumulative effect? Number one, the number of untraced shareholders in the Celtic share register, I'll use the word, is huge for all the reasons I've touched upon there. And if you are dislocated from your shareholding for any of the reasons I've mentioned, and there are others, it has two effects. Number one, you don't get any reporting accounts because the company's registrars, these are the people engaged by the company to manage a shareholder base, don't know where to send it. If it bounces twice, it tends to be not sent out a third time. And that number is large and growing. It's the same with dividends. Shareholders got a dividend from 1997 with the preference shares. And if that dividend cheque is not cashed or it's returned, it stays in an escrow stroke suspense account, and that accumulates over the years. So these numbers are large, and it's really because people don't know how to keep the share register up to date. Nobody's actually told them. So it's quite a worrying situation, and that's one of the reasons that the Celtic Trust want to get involved in this. It is a shareholder society, and they do look to help fans get reacquainted with their shares.
So when you think about the Celtic Trust and the whole purpose of us chatting today, David, there's a message out there to many people who will be listening to the Celtic State of Mind who 26 years ago heard the rallying cry from Fergus, and as you say, did everything in their power to get probably the minimum, for the most part, amount of money together to buy the shares so that they could be part of this new journey under Fergus. And we've seen how that's developed over 26 years. So we're hoping that this is going to offer a platform for the Celtic Trust to give a message out to Celtic fans and the wider Celtic community that this situation may be ongoing just now. What would be your message to each individual shareholder who may be affected by this?
Well, the message is the Celtic Trust will be doing something about this. The Celtic Trust will be working with the club, to help remedy what is a large problem. And it, just for the avoidance of doubt, it's not a problem that's particular to Celtic. It's a problem shared by all companies that have a large and diverse shareholder base. But it tends to be particularly acute with football companies. So with an average company, usually about 5% of the shareholder base is what's called untraced, and I sort of described what untraced meant a minute ago. But with football clubs, you tend to have a much wider shareholder base because fans are not just buying the shares because they think it's an investment. They're buying the shares because it's an emotional commitment. They think they're helping the club, in which they are. So that there's these two reasons are pertinent. With Celtic, though, because it's such a big club and because the flotation in 1994 was the biggest at the time and maybe the biggest ever since, we have an even larger shareholder base than the average football club. Factor in the fact that there's been 3 subsequent share issues. There was the one I mentioned, the original one, that was when Fergus and the others came in. There was a share issue in 1999 when Fergus left and his shares were offered to the fans. There was another one in 2001 which introduced a third category of shares, a thing called a preferred ordinary share. And then there was a rights issue, which is basically an offer to all the existing shareholders of ordinary shares in 2005. So you've had 4 issues, 3 categories of shares, all marketed at a shareholder base who, again, are unsophisticated investors in the nicest sense of the word. And that has all contributed to the situation that we find ourselves in 20 years later. So we know what the problem is. We know the importance of fixing it. And we will be working with Celtic to fix it. So we've brought it to the fore. We've highlighted it. We want to help fans to get their shares back, reconnected. And there will be news to follow and all of this over the next few months.
You're saying there updating, obviously the fans is important, and the Celtic Trust are active on social media, for example. You've got your own site. How else can fans get in touch? Should they require a wee bit more guidance on this, David?
Yeah, I think the Celtic Trust has been helping. Now that we're sort of over the worst of the virus, or fingers crossed, we're over the worst of COVID-19, you can sort of focus on more issues like this. But I think the problem is so large that Celtic Trust can't sort of fix it on its own. It really has to work with Celtic. Celtic have the infrastructure, the registrars have the infrastructure, and we'll get involved in helping reconnect shareholders with their shares. Again, there's another factor that makes it particularly acute. There's a thing called a shareholder reference number. If you want to get started in re-engaging with your shareholding, you need what's called a shareholder reference number, and that's on each share certificate that a supporter should have if it's not been lost, or on a dividend check if it's been received. But if you have relocated, not notified the club, you won't have that share reference number, and it's further exaggerated by the fact that most shares were bought in 1994 with the original Fergus prospectus, and a different registrar was involved, and those share certificates that were issued at the time don't have the share reference number on it. So you've got all of these factors all contributing to a very large problem. So it's easily fixed with a bit of effort and a bit of cooperation, and we'll be working with Celtic PLC to achieve that objective.
When we're looking at 25,000 shareholders, David, 26 years, and obviously this issue you've described as being huge in terms of maybe the numbers affected, what would a company normally do? That money would go into a suspense account. Is there a time limit? Because I think sitting here as unsophisticated a shareholder as you would find, I wouldn't have an idea of this. So I would probably be one of these guys who are listening to this thinking, what do I do now? Is there a time limit where you can actually lose your dividend?
Well, you can't lose your dividend, but it can be reclaimed by the company, in this instance, Celtic. So there's two areas that are pertinent that you just mentioned there. Number one is the share ownership itself. Even though you may have lost the share certificate, even though you may have inherited shares that haven't been registered in your own name, at the end of the day, you still own the shares, and there's nothing that a company can do to change that unless they really passed a special resolution and advertised in 2 national newspapers and commandeered the shares, so to speak. It's technically possible, but I don't think we're anywhere near that in the instance of Celtic. So that's the share ownership side. The main downside in a shareholder not being connected with his shares is that he can't vote. The whole point of being a shareholder is you're a part owner. You own part of the club, and all shareholders are equal, have equal rights in the Companies Act and in any other law you wish to apply. But you can't get to exercise that vote. You can't get a say. You can't turn up at the general meetings that Celtic have at least once a year. You can't contribute to and opine and express an opinion if you don't receive the report and accounts, if you don't get the chance to attend the AGM. So that's got to be fixed and can be fixed. The other aspect, as I said, there's three shares. One of them pays a dividend. That's the one called the preference share that was issued in 1994, started paying a dividend in 1997 and continues to pay a dividend every year. So that dividend is 3.6 pence a share. Now imagine you lost the share certificate, or you moved house and you've not been cashing that cheque. So working this in my head, if there's been 23 dividends and you own 500 shares, which is the most common shareholding, that's over 400 quid. So it's getting to the point where it's quite a large amount of money, and if you extrapolate that, it's even more money. And as each year goes by, it's potentially even more money. So I think what you were alluding to there is that there is in the Celtics articles, and as permitted by company law, if a dividend is not reclaimed after 12 years, the company, and this is Celtic, can appropriate it, take it, and they can do whatever they want with it. They can keep it in the company. They can give it to good causes. Lots of companies appropriate dividends after 12 years and apply it to good causes. Celtic did this last year for the first time. The total amount of money of reclaimed dividends was £70,000. That's a lot of money. No doubt the same will happen this year. I don't know what they do with it, whether the company gets it or whether they give it to the Celtic Foundation, or that's unclear and unstated. But, that's one of the elements we'll discuss with Celtic when we have these discussions. So it's all very positive, and what I'm talking about is really highlighting an issue and also touching upon what we're going to do about it. So,
and I think
we'll keep it all positive.
Absolutely, Dave. And I think what would be good is a Celtic State of Mind is here for any updates you wish to provide from the Celtic Trust's end, and obviously it's going out to an audience who will be able to act on any advice or updates that you provide. There's a few other issues at the moment with Celtic, such as selling 50,000 season tickets for games you can't attend, not knowing when we can attend it, virtual season tickets. That's a massive development since the last time we spoke in relation to a huge amount of investment coming in during a very difficult time. Would you like to talk about any kind of further thoughts you've had on the stability of Scottish football and where that leaves Celtic as well?
Well, I'll just state the obvious. It's the greatest crisis facing Scottish football, British football, global world football since the Second World War, call it, because this is a pandemic. It's a global pandemic. I think that's what pandemic means. And if you can't go to a football game, that has a dramatic effect on the football club you support. Your club is deprived of a very, very important source of income. Scottish football is at the top of the league for the most reliant on match day revenues, simply because television revenues are a smaller proportion than in some other leagues. So the Scottish game's very exposed to this situation, but Scottish football fans, and I'm talking about other clubs as well as Celtic, have shown, as they always do, because at the end of the day, people come and go, fans are always there. They've shown great forbearance, great support right across the board, including our foes. So I think we've got 50,000 people that have paid a huge amount of money to watch nothing for the foreseeable future. We will have a digital pass. That's called faith. That's a fantastic gesture. I've done it. Everybody I know has done it. And it's because we have to do it. Because if we didn't do it, the club really would be in a very difficult financial position. We are a little bit better, a lot better off than just about every other club in Scotland, because we have a very strong balance sheet. We have money in the bank. We have a very valuable squad with players in demand. We have been very well run financially to get us into this situation, so we can't complain about that. But, and it's a big but, at the end of the day, we need a league to play in. There's no point being the richest, the best, the strongest, the most successful club in a league of your own. That doesn't work. So we need a league to play in, and it's important that the people that we have to play are financially solvent. And if you run through the other clubs, some are stronger than others. Without getting into the names, you probably know who they are. So we need a league to play in, and hopefully there will be a league to play in the season to come. And hopefully all the teams in the league will make it through to the end of the season. But it's a really bad situation that we all find ourselves in. There's no sugarcoating that.
There's a few things. I was listening back to our original interview that we did some time ago, David. We were talking about this quest for 9 in a row. That was back then. I think we maybe had 7 at that time. We've now got the 9. And you spoke about a concern that you might have had. What happens when we get the 9 and a 10? What happens then? And what you're looking at now is, as you say, an incredible amount of faith, 50,000 plus season ticket holders, not knowing when they can actually go and watch Celtic again, buying their tickets. When will that tail off will be the big question, because we've seen it actually during the 9 in a row, depending on, for example, second season under Ronnie Dyler, the interest levels dipped, the top tier was closed for European games. Once we hit the 10, from a business perspective, is that a concern for Celtic?
Well, it's all about that attitude of mind. I think there was a dip, when Ronnie was here. But one of the reasons, let's be frank, that we've sold 50,000 is not just extreme faith. It's 10. Nobody wants to miss out on the 10 because nobody's done the 10. So if you can afford it, you bought a season ticket in expectation of being there when the 10's done. Then I think most fans don't care whether they only get to see, if they miss half the season, as long as they get to see the end of the season and the 10 being achieved. But there's the danger of a big letdown, isn't there? Well, we've won 10. Well, there's the magical 55, going for 55. Nobody's won 55. We're the only team that could won 55. Rangers are going for the 1. We're going for the 55 if we win the 10. Yeah, there's a controversial statement for you.
Controversial to some, David, but totally agreed on by everybody else in this room. But the other thing I would ask you as well, I was reading back, as we do on a Celtic State of Mind, to the turn of the century where Alan MacDonald was talking about a transatlantic league, where was it the 8 top countries were looking at a merger. And that keeps coming back to my mind when we're speaking about where we are in Scottish football and how difficult it's going to be for clubs to re-establish, I think, after we come out of this pandemic. Do you think that's still on the table? And if you were involved in Celtic at this moment in relation to, the process of trying to take Celtic to the next level and stop punching above the weight, but be within a league, if you like, that, suits the ambition of the club, is that something you'd still be looking at?
Well, in this pandemic, let's be clear, anything goes. What has been going on for 25 years, it doesn't mean it's going to go on for another 25 years. I think what I call geo-blocking by UEFA, i.e. saying one club with a football jurisdiction can't play in another jurisdiction with a league. I think that's all going to get challenged. The existing television structures, whereby a centralised body like Sky, gets to carve up territories and we have to pay exorbitant fees to watch it. I think that's all going to be challenged. Younger generations are can watch any football game, any sports event, anywhere on a device. Nobody's really under the age of 30 is really into the idea of watching a game and an exorbitant price on a big screen in the corner of somebody's room. Everything that you've been used to, or people of my age have been used to, is getting challenged. I think this virus is going to really shake the whole live sports market to its foundations. Not sure how it will all pan out, but I think there's fantastic opportunities for Celtic in a period of undoubted change. We are a big fish in a small pond, and I personally, someone of my age, I was brought up, I'm looking at all these magnificent pictures here of Jimmy Johnson playing against Vojvodina, Fiorentina, etc., etc. That's the Celtic that people of my age are used to. Older people are used to a rotten Celtic, Peter Riley, who sits next to me, must be 80 now. He keeps telling me how awful Celtic were pre-Jock Stein. But I'm used to Celtic post-Jock Stein, and that is the Celtic I want to see. Celtic that's regularly competing in the latter stages of the biggest European competitions. I was about 40 before I realised it wasn't going to be. I was that misguided. But I think there's going to be change. Celtic have been looking at playing in a different jurisdiction since the 1990s, and Fergus was there. There were no rules pre-1998 to stop Celtic playing in England, for example. It was only when the football authorities realised there was no rule to stop Celtic playing in England and Porto playing in La Liga and Ajax playing in the Bundesliga that UEFA deliberately brought in rules to prevent that happening. So that was on the agenda back in the 90s, but it was stopped in its tracks. You mentioned Alan MacDonald. He looked at the Atlantic League as well, clubs in a similar position to us, the Norwegian and Swedish teams, and it petered out. I'd rather be playing in the Champions League or something of that status than in an Atlantic League or something similar. That's just my opinion. Lots of other people will have different opinions. What I'm saying is I think there will be tremendous opportunities. Celtic are a respected club. Peter Lawwell is on the board of the ECA. Our voice is at the table. Our voice is heard. Everybody knows Celtics, what Celtic's all about. It is a global brand, a global club. So if there's going to be change, I think we'll be there or thereabouts, which is good.
Now, I'm trying to do a quick calculation in my mind, and I'm sorry in advance if I get this wrong, but I think you'd have been in your early teens the first time Celtic won 9 in a row. Would I be right in saying that?
Yes.
Right? And if you can compare the winning of the 9 back then to where we were when we were awarded the 9th league title in a row now, David, what did you do to celebrate?
Well, I wasn't 18, so I didn't get drunk. Well, officially, I've experienced 3 9 in a rows, so I'll talk about all 3. Yeah, there was, during the first 9, there was a blaseness, is that a word? Celtic crowds, Celtic gates actually tailed off after about 6 or 7. The average gate fell because you just get used to being the best team. Jock Stein was the best manager, we were the best team, and we had the best players, but we get sort of fat and lazy about it. But see, when the 9 came along, it was almost like, well, it was 8. 9's good. I don't recall, everybody going crazy like they did when we stopped Rangers winning 10, or like last year when we won the 9. So again, for me, half the first 9 was like you're just a little kid. It wasn't the most important thing in the world. It was great fun. The winning the European Cup, that's like indelible. That was just crazy where I lived. I was like the only Celtic guy in the street, and I really enjoyed winning that. And I'm not allowed to say it, but Rangers losing the following week was quite funny as well. Anyway, the Rangers 9, I can tell you that because I know how Rangers fans feel. The 9 that they won was awful. You're old enough to remember that.
Yep. Yeah.
And I was working at Celtic at the time, and I used to have to go to these road shows. I was like the guy that held the line for the board, Fergus's sort of tough financial business plan. We had to be tight with money because there was a stadium to build. If you didn't build that stadium, we would not be benefiting from the situation that we find ourselves in now. So part of the revenue that we generated at the time had to go in building the infrastructure to ensure that we were going to be around forever and a day. But see, when Rangers are at 7 and everybody's going crazy, and you have to stand in front of an audience of Celtic fans in Las Vegas that have been drinking for a week, or in Derry, or in Wimbledon and Brentford and all the places I had to do it, Celtic fans were as crazy, worried, paranoid as Rangers fans are just now. I remember one, I can't remember where it was. It might have been in Las Vegas, but it was DeCanio. Just give him the money, give him whatever he wants. Give him on if whatever he wants. Just, we've got to stop the 9. That was, I've still got a tape of that. I should ask you guys to put it on a podcast, because you'd have to beep out the swear words. Tell that wee beggy guy to give him the... So, this is what it was all about. Nobody wants the opposition to set new records. This was true for the second 9 that I experienced, the Rangers 9, and of course we won the league, and that was a big day in my sort of Celtic career, so to speak. Here we are at 9. It feels a wee bit blasé, I have to say. It was absolutely fantastic. But I'm great, we've got the 9, but the 10 starts with the first game. The 10 starts with 90 minutes on the 1st of August. I think that's the first game. And then it means what the manager will tell you. Then it's the second game, the third game. It's a cliche, take each game at a time, play your best in the 94th minute, or as good in the 94th minute as you did in the first. Can't get carried away. Every game counts. It'll be fantastic if we win it. There won't be a downturn, because does that make 52? Have I got that right?
Yep, 52. Well, yeah.
Then it's 53, 54, 55. Then 55 is the magic number. That's your incentive. That's the answer to your question.
Mm-hmm. Something I've heard a lot of over the last number of years during the process of the mismanagement of Rangers from the highest echelons to the point where they were liquidated. And we know what happened, because you quite rightly said it was controversial. You're just dealing in facts there, David. They're going for one. What I hear a lot from Celtic fans is, if Fergus McCann had been here, he'd have done this, he'd have done that. And what we're looking at is Celtic are a remarkably well-run club. And as you say, the foundations were laid by Fergus and the people around about him at that time. Would Fergus have had any power to do anything any differently with what was going on in Scottish football around about the financial shenanigans that had gone on for years and years?
Well, Fergus was there for 94, 99, and he fought Celtic's corner in a Fergus kind of way. I don't know how you describe it, but the challenges we had then were enormous. Remember, Rangers had a stadium that was complied with the Taylor Report. For younger people, Taylor Report was a report that compelled football clubs to have all-seater stadia. Celtic didn't have an all-seater stadia. Celtic had 8,000 seats in a standing capacity of 52, and that means we were really in a very difficult situation. So we solved that problem, but if you're spending, for every pound that a supporter puts into the club, a significant proportion of that had to go in the stadium. So for 5 years, our player budget was always going to be inferior to Rangers. And even when Fergus came in, we're starting off from minus something behind Rangers because they were already rolling. They'd been rolling since 1988 when Murray came in. So when Fergus came in, Rangers already had a better squad. Rangers already had a bigger budget. Rangers already had a management team in place. And we didn't really have anything in place, if the truth be told. No seats, like I mentioned. I was looking at the prospectus before I came on this, and I was looking at our squad, and I laughed. It wasn't very good. So we were coming from way behind, but we had this pent-up energy that was unleashed, when the club was taken over by Fergus in 1994, and we really did support those share issues in a huge way, and it really did create the foundation. Fans stepped up in a huge way, and we had this energy that I think Rangers had the lethargy, I think, that is referred to at Celtic, in the first 9. But we had the energy, and I think energy carried us over the line in the season when we won the league. I believe then, and I believe now, it's how you run your house, how you run your business. You cannot spend more than you earn on a consistent basis. You can do it for a while if you've got an old-fashioned thing called a savings, money in the bank, but you eventually run your savings or money in the bank down to zero. You can maybe prolong the awkward decision by lending some debt, some loans, but if you're going to continue to live above your means, whether it's your house, your business, or a football club, you'll eventually get to the point where you can't borrow any more. What I've just said there is simplistic, but it's true. So the Rangers situation in the 1990s was unsustainable. The amount of money they burnt through 40 million off Enoch, 20 million off, Dave King, debentures, 7 million. You can add it all up. I think £250 million was blown over 25 years. And it's basically because it was a cycle of spending more than you earn. So that's never going to work. It didn't work then, and it culminated in Rangers being liquidated. One of 4 clubs, 3 other clubs is one where we're sitting. Third Lanark. The other 2, of course, are forgotten. Airdrie and Gretna. There you go. So that's what happens when you spend more than you earn. There is a sort of irony in all this. The current Rangers are doing what? Spending more than they're earning. They've got directors in common with the previous club, and the situation that they have there, without saying anything other than the obvious, is unsustainable. So that's not our problem. In 1990s and now, we just try to be the best we can be and not really worry about the opposition. And I think that's what the Celtic board does, and the Celtic manager does, just try and be the best we can be. So we have got more money, we have got a bigger and better squad, we've definitely got an experienced and better manager. We'd have to throw it away, quite frankly. That's the only way I can see us losing the league, if we throw it away through, guess what, apathy. So I'm confident. I think we've got a fantastic manager, and bring it on.
One final question for you, David. This has come to light through an interview I did a few weeks back that got a bit of traction. It was with John Barnes. One of the questions that I posed to John was about the Raphael deal, the Raphael shite deal. And it was brought to my attention that Fergus had a policy of, when signing a player, going to see them, and I don't know how accurate this is, on 3 occasions before we sign them. Yeah. And the only exception being Harold Bratback, because Wim Jansen was so convinced.
He refused to go and see him. I've just written a foreword for a new book, Fergus McCann versus David Murray.
Oh, yeah.
And I've got an advance copy because I wrote the foreword, and I'm just at this bit whereby Wim Jansen just resolutely, I'm not going. I'm not going to see Bratback because I'm leaving at the end of the season. So I'm not interested in bringing the guy in who scored the second goal, made us all relax in the 71st minute, I think it was. So I'm just going off on a tangent there. What was the question?
Was it the book? That's what it was. Was it a situation where Fergus McCann insisted, or was it a policy that we went and watched players? Because obviously we were stung later on under John Barnes / Kenny Dalglish.
Yeah. Well, keep talking about Fergus. At the end of the day, it was a board. Fergus had a very strong board. So, yeah, Fergus was the chairman, the chief executive, the controlling shareholder, but he was surrounded by a very good board. Brian Quinn was a very good vice chairman that became the chairman when Fergus left. And there was a few other directors. The obvious one was Patrick Sheehy, and there were others. It was a strong board, and Fergus implemented these decisions, but it was the board that made these decisions. And one of the decisions was we're not going to spend a shed load of money on a guy that nobody has seen. So what you're positing is true, but the relationship with Janssen, remember Jock Brown, Davy Hay, Murdo MacLeod, Fergus McCann, all these big personalities trying to get on when everybody's going on about 999, and stopping it. It was quite combustible. I was involved in a couple of these combustible situations as well, eyeballing and all that, but that's not for the air.
So was that all thrown out the window when
yes,
the Brazilian?
Again, the stories I can't tell you about. No, everything. Alan MacDonald was the chief executive. He still had the same board, essentially. But, a chief executive is a chief executive. He gets to make big decisions and big calls. And he brought in Barnes and Kenny Dalglish. And I think it's reasonable to say that is not what Fergus McCann would have done, not what Fergus McCann would have wanted. And I think in that determination, he's right. And because it didn't work out. I mean, it's insane, in my word, to bring in a rookie manager. You could be the best football player in the world, whether it's Bobby Charlton, for the older guys, went on to manage Preston and was a big flop. Being a good football player, does not mean that you're going to be a good manager. It's a different skill set. And more often than not, it doesn't work out. We brought in Liam Brady immediately pre the takeover. Again, one of the best players in the world. He didn't have it as a manager, and I don't think he went on to manage any other clubs. I think he's quite a successful coach, maybe scout with Arsenal to this day, but that's an obvious example. Barnes was the same, one of the best players in the world, scored a great goal in the Maracana, was it, when he was a player for England, but he just didn't have it as a manager, and his record shows that. It had nothing to do with race. I don't know if that was alluded to in your interview, but I've heard him allude to this, or he didn't have enough time. He just wasn't a very good manager, irrespective of his ethnicity. And I don't think he went on to have any successful managerial career. He might have, was it MK Dons or something for Tranmere Rovers? Tranmere in Jamaica. It just wasn't very good. And I don't think Kenny Dalglish had the work ethic, quite frankly. So it was a bad choice. And it cost Celtic a lot of money. With Raphael, Shide. That's the posh way, Shide. There was a scam in Brazil at the time. I think, give a guy a couple of caps, his market value goes up exponentially by a number. And, a guy that's been capped by Brazil, when the agent gets on, hey, we've got a Brazilian that wants to come to Glasgow. How many caps he got? He's got a couple of caps. It must be good. And of course he wasn't. So I don't know the details. I know the agent involved, but I don't know how that happened, and it was a disaster. But hey, that happens in football. Think of all the awful players we've had over the years. Martin Hayes, he was $650.
I know, a lot of money spent.
Billy McNeil bought him, I think. But, you can't, I mean, even in the last 20 years, when everybody goes on about all the big successes, there's a conveyor belt of disasters. So it's a bit of a crapshoot. There's no guarantees. We've got the big ones right, but there's an awful lot of bad ones. So rookie managers, Steven Gerrard's a rookie manager. Well, why would you do that? The guy's got no experience.
No, they're going for profile over kind of substance.
Yeah, it sells tickets. Yeah. But there's a league to win or lose.
Well, David, hopefully throughout the league season that's fastly approaching, you can join us again and offer another update from the Celtic Trust to the shareholders of Celtic Football Club. All that's left for me to say is once again, for the third time, thank you for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind.
Delighted to have been here. Thank you very much.